All right, welcome to Unit 4, day 2. This is video 2. We're talking about Russia, so let's just go ahead and jump right on into it. I'm going to give you a lot of background information. You don't need to write it all down, so don't feel like you need to write every single word down, okay? So Russia had been ruled by Ivan III from 1462 until 1405. He was responsible for some pretty big changes in Russia, but the biggest changes are yet to come with Peter the Great. Some of the stuff that Ivan III is responsible for is that he conquered much of the area around Moscow. He liberated Russia from Mongol rule, which Russia had been ruled, if you look at the map here, like the Mongol area, Mongolia is right down in this area here. And Russia had been ruled by the Mongols for quite some time. We'll talk about that in a few minutes too. And finally, he begins to centralize the Russian government in Moscow. So Ivan III is succeeded by his son Vasily, who ruled for about 28 years. After Vasily is dead and passes on, his son Ivan IV, who's also known as Ivan the Terrible, he becomes the absolute ruler of Russia. So Russia is different, okay? First thing you got to know is that Russia is different than any other place that we've talked about. First of all, like I mentioned a minute ago, it had been under Mongol rule for over 200 years. And the Mongols were telling the Russians, hey, look, you can't be your own selves. You can't dress the way you want. You can't talk the way you want. You can't do anything Russian. You must do everything the Mongol way, or you can pay some really high taxes. Second, they are Eastern Orthodox Christians. So they're not Catholic. They're not Protestant. Up until now, you've heard me talk a lot about being Catholic or Protestant. But in Russia, they are neither. They are Russian Eastern Orthodox Christian, okay? Their alphabet is different as well. They use the Cyrillic alphabet. Fourth way that Russia is going to be different is that it is absolutely landlocked. So if you look at on the map, you can see that at this point in time, they don't really have any, let me go back to the map. Hang on. If you go back, like you see the Caspian Sea down here and you see the Black Sea down here, but they really don't have any way of getting out and trading with anyone because even this area up here, they don't get that territory until later. And all of this water up here, it all freezes. So there's no way that people can get around and trade, okay? So they're completely landlocked. Their rivers don't flow out into any areas of trade. So Russia is completely isolated. You've got to remember, they have no shared history with Europe at all. They didn't experience the Renaissance. They didn't go through the Reformation, and they certainly haven't had any sort of age of exploration. All right, so a minute ago I mentioned Ivan the Terrible. He gave himself the title Tsar, which you can see written a few different ways. You can see it spelled a few different ways on your SOL. You might see it spelled C-Z-A-R, or you could see it spelled T-Z-A-R. Another way you might see it is C-S-A-R, or you could still see it spelled as T-S-A-R, okay? So basically what you need to know is that Tsar is the Russian term for Caesar, okay? And if you look at the C-S-A-R, you can pretty easily see where it came from Caesar. They just dropped a few letters out of it, okay? So Ivan the Terrible makes himself an absolute ruler. He's taken power from the noble class, which were called the boyars, and he's also got a secret police that he uses to perform torture techniques on people who oppose him. So life isn't the greatest under Ivan the Fourth. In the wake of his rule, times are really troubled in Russia. Okay, so I think that this is where your notes pick up. So make sure you're getting this stuff down. So for about 15 years, from 1598 until 1613, life was pretty unpleasant. First of all, the boyars, who, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, were the noble class, they were desperate and fighting to get their power back. Secondly, there was complete chaos. And this is Ivan the Fourth, Ivan the Terrible. So there's complete chaos and anarchy in the government at this point because people have had their power taken away. People are struggling to get it back. And finally, we see that these times of trouble end with the first ruler of the Romanov dynasty, which ends up ruling for Russia for 300 years. Okay, so remember, we've got these families that are going to run certain areas. The Romanov dynasty, or the Romanovs, are the ones that run Russia. Okay, all right, so let's move on to the guy that is the most important one for you to know in Russian history, and that's Peter the Great. Here he is. If you take a minute, just check him out for a second. He literally looks different than all of the other Russian rulers had looked in the past. So if you compare him to Peter or Ivan the Terrible, they look pretty different, right? Let's go back and forth for a second. There we go. Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible. Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible. Okay, so he's very different than Peter the Great. He just looks different. Okay, so in the small box beside your name, beside his name, make sure you've got this stuff written down. 1, that he's an absolute ruler. 2, that his main goal was to westernize Russia, and westernize is a vocab term you should remember, and that and know what that means. And the third thing you want to do is that he wanted Russia to become more like England. But how does he go about doing this? Well, Peter had the chance to travel to Europe when he was a young man. So he wants Russia to definitely become more European, okay? So he ends up doing some pretty great stuff for Russia. Let's take a look at some of the steps he took to westernize Russia. First of all, he takes control of the Russian Orthodox Church. Does that sound like anyone else in England that we've talked about? If you're thinking Henry VIII, yes, you're right. The second thing he does is he reduced the power of the nobles, and he brought in lower-ranking families to help him rule. Again, have you heard about anybody else in Europe who has decreased the power of the nobles? Peter's doing the same thing here in Russia, okay? When he gets back to Russia, after he made several trips to European countries like England and Germany. This is one of the other things you need to write down in that box. He made several trips to England, to Germany, and the Netherlands to get ideas on how things were done in Western Europe. And then when he returns to Russia, this is your 4th bullet, he forces these Western ways onto the Russian people. So things like clothing, various customs like the men having beards. That was a big deal. There was a beard tax if you had a beard. So he's forcing all of these different customs and things onto the Russian people, things like newspapers, food, even, he wanted so badly for everything to be like Western European. Okay, so remember that I told you that one of the ways that Russia was different was that they were landlocked. Well, Peter the Great, he actually fought Sweden for 21 years. You can see Sweden is right up here, this purple area. Okay, so Peter the Great, he ends up wanting a port. So what he does is he fights Sweden for 21 years in the Great Northern War so that they could gain access to the Baltic Sea. So this is the Baltic Sea right here. Okay, Sweden used to have control of all of this land here, but Peter the Great fights Sweden, and eventually after 21 years, he ends up gaining this land, this territory for Russia. So now they actually have access to the Baltic Sea, so now they can actually go on and trade some. He also creates a large army, and to maintain this large army, as well as some of these other changes that he's implementing, he's got to have some money. So to have money, he increased taxes. And the final step he took to westernize Russia was that he moved the capital of Russia from Kiev, which you can see it right down here. This is Kiev right here. He moves it from Kiev up to St. Petersburg, which is right here. So now, by doing this, he has created a window to the west, okay, for Russia, meaning that they now have access to the west through the Baltic Sea, okay? So Peter the Great brought a lot of great changes and progress for Russia, okay? Okay, this lady on the Catherine the Great. I love this portrait of her. She's just kind of like, what? All right, so a couple summers ago, I read a fantastic biography about this woman. I highly recommend it. It's titled Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman. It's by Robert Massey. So I'll try not to go into too much detail on her because there's really not much you need to know for your SOL. But seriously, if you enjoy reading about other people's lives, if you like biographies, I really recommend this one. It's a pretty good one. And you can find it at the public library too. All right, so Catherine ruled from 1762 until she dies from a stroke at age 67. She was actually a German princess who had married a Russian noble, Peter III. They had been married for about 6 months when she took the throne from him because he was really a weak ruler and he did not care so much about ruling. So she took over. She takes charge. Eventually, she has him jailed, and he was murdered while he was in jail. Um, and when she comes to rule, she has the belief that all of the people were equal, and she didn't view slavery in a favorable light. In other words, she wasn't. She was anti-slavery. Okay, she felt like everybody was equal, but there were a few peasant uprisings that occurred during her reign, and that changed her view on things. So her opinions about equality and any peasants' rebellion, like all of that influenced her, and her ideas start to change. So from this point on, anytime there is a peasant rebellion that pops up, she squashes it immediately. I mean, it is brutally crushed. Okay. So what is it about her that makes her so great? Well, for starters, she defeated the Ottoman Turks, which now gives Russia access to the Black Sea. So if we're looking at our map here, okay, we've got access to the Baltic Sea here now. Okay, the Ottoman Empire is right down here in this bottom left-hand corner. The Black Sea, they had pretty much control over. Okay, so when she comes in and she fights them, and they now are able to gain control over the Black Sea for good. Okay, so she defeats the Turks. She also adds on part of Poland to Russia as well. So looking at the map, you can see that the green areas were added by Peter the Great. Catherine the Great is responsible for the yellowish areas. Okay, those are the ones that she added into Russia. So she's responsible for a couple other great things too. She really cared about her people. She was a caring leader. So she starts schools in Russia. She opens up schools in Russia for everyone, as well as opening up hospitals as well. So you can tell that she definitely cared about her people and loved Russia and wanted it to be successful. Okay, not a lot that the SOL requires you to know about her. I could go on and on and on about her for quite a while because she's a pretty cool lady. She's got a really interesting life. All right, but next class we're going to go and we're going to talk about so many more people. We're going to England where we're going to talk about absolutism there. We're going to have a bloodless revolution that's going to occur, all sorts of stuff like that. The throne's going to be changing hands left and right. So next class, that's where we're going, absolutism in England.